Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig into sources, research, articles, you name it, and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're jumping into a real classic of personal finance, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Our goal here is pretty simple. Cut through the hype, give you a shortcut to understanding what it's really about, its core message, its impact. Basically, get you up to speed quickly on this very influential book.
Oh, it's definitely influential, yeah. Basically, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It contrasts two really different ways of thinking, two approaches to building wealth. And it does it through a story, a narrative. It's less a step-by-step manual and more about shifting how you fundamentally think about money.
Right. That story element feels so central. It's all built around Kiyosaki's Poor Dad versus his Rich Dad. Yeah. So maybe you could introduce these two figures for us. Like, what's the main difference in how they saw the world? Sure. So the Poor Dad, that was actually his biological father. Highly educated, government job. This dad represented the traditional path. Get good grades, get a safe job, work for your money, climb the ladder.
The standard advice most of us hear growing up.
Exactly. Save money, avoid debt, that sort of thing. Then you have the rich dad. This was his best friend's father, an entrepreneur, and he was all about, financial education, but the practical kind. Taking calculated risks, starting businesses, and really the core idea, making money work for you, not the other way around.
And the book uses these key episodes, these stories, to show the difference, right? I remember the paperclip thing early on.
Yeah.
And the tax lessons. Could you maybe walk us through one of those just to make it sort of concrete?
Yeah, absolutely. There's that early story where young Kiyosaki works for his rich dad for almost nothing, pennies an hour.
Yeah.
And the whole point wasn't the pay, it was learning how money actually works.
Yeah.
That leads into that paperclip business idea where they learned about, finding a need, creating a simple business, very hands-on. And then later, the more complex stuff about taxes and corporations. It shows how rich dad used the system legally to his advantage, playing by different rules than poor dad, who was just an employee paying taxes on his income. These were real formative lessons for Kiyosaki.
Okay, those stories really set the stage for what many people say is the book's biggest takeaway, that clear way of looking at purchases, assets versus liabilities. What's Kiyosaki's big idea here? Why is this distinction so important?
It's revolutionary because it's so simple, but it forces you to rethink everything. An asset, he says, is anything that, quote, puts money into your pocket. Simple as that.
Okay, like what?
Like a rental property, bringing in rent, stocks that pay dividends, maybe a business you own that generates profit, things that produce income. And then a liability is the opposite. It takes money out of your pocket.
Takes money out.
Yeah. And the classic, and like you said, sometimes controversial example he gives is your own home, the mortgage payment specifically. The core lesson isn't just the definition. It's shifting your focus. Stop worrying so much about just owning stuff and start focusing on acquiring things that generate income.
Okay, but hang on. Calling your primary residence a liability, that's going to rub some people the wrong way. I mean, isn't owning a home like the cornerstone of building wealth for most people?
It's definitely counterintuitive for many. His argument is, look, while your house might go up in value over time, day to day, month to month, it costs you money. Mortgage, property taxes, insurance, repairs, all that stuff takes money out of your pocket.
Okay, I see the logic there.
His point isn't don't buy a house. It's more like don't confuse it with an income-generating asset. His advice is usually build up your assets, first the things putting money in your pocket, and then let those assets pay for your liabilities, like your house. It's a reframe.
Big reframe. Okay, so this obviously ties into education. But it sounds like the Rich Dad version of education is pretty different from regular school. What's Kiyosaki's take on what schools teach us about money? Or maybe what they don't teach us?
Yeah, that's a huge theme. His point is schools are great at teaching you how to work, how to be a good employee, but they generally do a terrible job teaching you how money works, how to manage it, how to invest it, how to make it grow.
So financial literacy is kind of missing.
Totally missing in his view. And that's where the rich dad philosophy comes in. It stresses, constant self-education. Not necessarily more degrees, but reading books, finding mentors, going to seminars, taking responsibility for learning this stuff yourself.
And it's not just the what, it's also the how, right? Like the mindset. Kiyosaki talks a lot about fear and risk. What does he see as the main psychological hurdles stopping people from building wealth?
He really digs into this. He argues that the poor and middle class mindset often defaults to playing it safe, sticking with the steady job, avoiding anything that looks like risk. The rich, on the other hand, are willing to take calculated risks. And that word calculated is key,
Right.
meaning it's not just wild gambling. It's about educating yourself first, understanding the potential downsides, analyzing the opportunity, and then having the courage to act. Beyond that, he points to things like fear of losing money, fear of failing, even fear of what other people will think, and also cynicism.
Cynicism. How so?
Like that tendency to immediately shoot down opportunities, saying, oh, that'll never work, without actually investigating. Fear and cynicism, he says, keep people stuck. Overcoming them is crucial.
Okay, now let's talk about something that might surprise people. Taxes and corporations. Most folks assume rich people just pay way more tax. But Kiyosaki suggests the rich play a different game. What's the core idea there?
Yeah, this is often eye-opening for readers. The fundamental idea is that tax laws often incentivize businesses and corporations differently than individual employees. It's not about illegal tax evasion, it's about understanding the legal structures. A business, generally speaking, earns income, then spends money on expenses, and then pays taxes on the remaining profit.
Okay.
An employee earns income, pays taxes first, and then lives on what's left. It's a totally different sequence. So Kiyosaki highlights how the wealthy often use corporations, LLCs, things like that, to legally minimize their tax burden by taking advantage of deductions available to businesses. And he stresses you need to understand at least basic accounting to make this work for you. It's about knowing the rules of the game.
A different rule book entirely.
Okay.
Shifting slightly, there's another kind of counterintuitive idea he promotes. Work to learn, not to earn. That sounds, well, contrary to why most people get a job. What's he getting at?
It's really aimed especially at younger people starting out, but the principle applies broadly. The idea is, instead of just chasing the highest salary right out of the gate, prioritize jobs that teach you valuable skills. He specifically mentions things like sales, marketing, communication, leadership skills that are vital for business and investing.
Even if the pay isn't great initially.
Exactly, even if the pay is lower in the short term. The knowledge and experience you gain in those key areas, he argues, will be worth far more in the long run for building wealth than a slightly higher paycheck in a dead-end job. Build your skill set first.
That makes sense as a long-term strategy.
Yeah.
But, people have bills to pay now. If someone's already mid-career, maybe feeling stuck, is it realistic to suddenly switch focus from earning to learning? Does he talk about that?
That's a fair point. He doesn't necessarily say everyone should quit their job tomorrow and take an unpaid internship. It's more about adopting the mindset. Even in your current job, are there opportunities to learn new skills? Can you volunteer for a project that stretches you? Can you take a course on the side? For someone established, it might mean dedicating evenings or weekends to learning about investing or starting a small side business to learn sales firsthand. It's about consciously prioritizing skill acquisition alongside earning.
Gotcha. So it's a continuous process. Okay, we've covered a lot of the core ideas. What is it about this book, despite being relatively simple in some ways, that makes it stick with people? The review source we looked at called it eye-opening. What gives it that power?
I think there are a few things. First, as we said, the storytelling. Those anecdotes about the two dads make abstract ideas really concrete and frankly memorable. It reads like a story, not a finance text.
Yeah, definitely.
Second, that actionable framework, especially the asset-liability distinction, it gives you a simple, powerful filter to run decisions through. But maybe the biggest thing is the mindset shift. It really does challenge core beliefs many people have about jobs, school, security, and what money is actually for. And yeah, the source mentioned it helped them stop seeing their house just as an expense and start thinking actively about income generation. That kind of shift can be really motivating.
Super motivating. But, okay, let's be balanced. This raises the question of criticisms. No book is perfect. What are the common knocks against Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Good question. Well, for people who already have some financial knowledge, the advice can feel maybe a bit basic, simplistic, even anecdotal at times. It lacks deep dives into complex strategies.
Okay, lacks depth for some.
Yeah, and there's criticism about the lack of specific how-to. It tells you what to do by assets, but not always the detailed steps of how to find, analyze, and finance, say, a rental property. It's more concept than detailed blueprint.
Leaves you wanting more practical steps sometimes.
Right. And then there's what some call the contested advice, particularly around using debt and leverage. Critics argue that pushing leverage without deeply explaining risk management can be dangerous for novices who might jump in without fully understanding the downsides. Which actually ties back to what our source said. They found it eye-opening, but had to supplement it with more technical, practical resources to actually implement things safely.
Right, so it's maybe a starting point, not the final destination.
Exactly.
So, wrapping this up, thinking about our listener, what does this all mean for you? Who is this book really for? And what's the final verdict from our analysis?
Well, based on the review and the book itself, it seems ideal for beginners in personal finance, anyone just starting to think seriously about money beyond a paycheck. Also, definitely for aspiring entrepreneurs, people interested in starting a business, understanding those tax advantages we talked about. And maybe most importantly, for mindset seekers, anyone feeling stuck in the traditional go to school, get a good job model, and wondering if there's another way.
People ready for that challenge to conventional wisdom.
Precisely. The verdict, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is still a really powerful wake-up call. It gets you thinking differently about financial literacy, about entrepreneurship. It's an excellent inspirational primer, and it's a significant but, you absolutely need to follow it up with more detailed, practical guides if you want to put the ideas into action safely and effectively. That source gave it a solid 4 out of 5, which feels about right.
Yeah, that sounds fair. What a great exploration. It really does seem like the biggest impact of Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't a secret formula, but that fundamental shift in how you look at money, work, and assets, it really pushes you to ask, am I just working for money or am I starting to make my money work for me? So maybe a final thought for you as you go about your day. Which dad's advice feels more dominant in your life right now? The Poor Dad's focus on security or the Rich Dad's focus on assets and learning? And maybe, just maybe, what's one small step you could take this week, either towards acquiring an asset, even a tiny one, or learning a new skill, working to learn something valuable? Thanks so much for joining us on The Deep Dive.